Today, I'm going to cover how to reduce harsh speech. Now, the Buddha says this. You can read on your own. The Buddha said this also about the other unwholesome deeds like killing, false speech, and sexual misconduct. Why do we have so many people doing the wrong thing and so few doing the right thing? Two reasons. First, they do not know a better way of doing things. And number two, it is not easy to do the right thing. We all know, right, how difficult it is to refrain ourselves from scolding our children, to refrain from retaliating when we are verbally attacked, and to remain calm when we do not get what we want. And why is that? Because we see the body as mind, I, and self. The ego, right? It is the same for feelings. We own the feelings. We get very personal. And the same for perception, how we see things. And we often cling to our views and we get upset when others do not agree with us. That is why we have quarrels between husband and wives and friends. You cling on to that view. And we also cling on to our mental formations, our thoughts, which includes in mental formation, sankhara, this includes what? Our motivations and our intentions. How we perceive things determine, right, how we relate to them, which shapes our intention. So here is where we make the karma through wholesome and unwholesome intentions. And then, of course, consciousness, which is our awareness through the six sense bases. These five aggregates, correct? Can you see the five aggregates? Made up of four parts mind and one part body. Again, what is the five aggregates? Body, feelings, perception, mental formation, and consciousness. In other words, we are all five aggregates, just different five aggregates. In short, the Buddha is saying that we take everything very personally, and all our needs and unmet needs stem from this sense of self, that ego. Behind all our actions, which include harsh speech, we will find either self-importance, self-interest, self-righteousness, or even self-denial. So this sense of self, that ego, will keep interfering with our attempts to exercise restraint. So it is not possible to change overnight. We need to develop the skills for right speech slowly and patiently. So how do we reduce harsh speech? Okay. Right. When we want to improve our verbal communication with others, we naturally think of ways to improve what we say. But we forget that listening is the other half of the communication equation. We speak while others listen, and we listen while others speak. Because of ego, this sense of self reigns supreme. Our conversation with another person is ultimately still about ourselves. You regard someone as a friend. Why? Because he listens to you when you talk. Sometimes, when others are talking, you may show, all right, that you are interested to hear what the other person is saying, but you are just waiting for an opportunity to interrupt so you can say what you want. How many of you actually call up your friend just to listen? You call up your friend to talk, isn't it? Now, remember this example given last week? conversation between husband and wife. Very typical. Huh? This is not exactly uh, overblown quarrel, but if you look at the definition the Buddha has given us accordingly, you will notice this is harsh speech. So we hear others, right? But we may not be listening, correct? Instead, we listen only to our own needs and acknowledge only our own judgment of others. So when we act to fulfill our needs or to express unmet needs, harsh speech can arise very easily because there is no room for empathy in our minds. So, brothers and sisters, we have to start reducing harsh speech by doing what first? Listening first. We shall call it right listening or mindful listening. Mindful listening means being genuinely interested in what the other person is saying. Mindful listening keeps us at the present moment, which means listening and not thinking about what you are going to say next, because what you're going to say next is a concern in the future. And since your response will be based on what you know of the person and the situation, that will be something from the past, right? So, no past, no future, just be, just listen without any judgment. Mindful listening is not something we just do, and then you don't think about it. It is a skill that takes practice. That is why Dale Carnegie, in his book, some of you may know about this book, it's called How to Win Friends and Influence People. He says it is very easy to find people who want to talk. It's very hard to find people who are actually interested in just listening. And mindful listening is what the Buddha meant when he told his audience this before he teaches the Dharma. Now, this is particularly challenging when you are having a very difficult conversation where you anticipate hearing something bad about yourself. We have to be aware of our mental state, know what it is, and then let it go. Then we can be non judgmental and do not decide whether a person is right or wrong, good or bad, because judgments that imply wrongness in another causes ill will and other negativities that can actually trigger harsh speech. Right? So, brothers and sisters, we have to remember this. It is not what the other people say or do that make us angry. It is how we respond to their actions that causes our anger. And then we let out harsh speech. Never mix up what people do or say with the cause of your own anger. So when a person say this, no or don't want, that is just an unskillful way of letting us know what his needs really are. What we should try to discern behind the words is why, how, right? That means we just listen to the story, we hear the meaning behind the story without any judgment. If you think that a spouse, for example, is very prejudiced against your best friend, the moment your spouse comes to you to complain about his feelings against your best friend, you would immediately become very defensive and you won't listen. You say, why are you always like that? Why are you reacting this way? Harsh speech arises. And remember that verbal communication is not confined to the spoken words and written communication. It also includes, right, the tone of your voice, facial expression, gestures. For example, right, a passive aggressive person may express his anger or displeasure in a very roundabout way, often with some degree of veiled hostility, while verbally maintaining that all is well, like agreeing to do something, but then suddenly sulk to show displeasure, or agreeing to do a chore, but then do it so poorly, or either forget to follow through. So when you do active listening, you look for the needs behind such behavior. For example, things like that. Okay, so you wonder, why did the person say what he did? So we will look at this in more detail in the section 3, the last series of right speech, when I do the doing good part. So in summary, we listen mindfully to really hear the other person's observations, feelings, needs, and requests, whether it is through verbal or non-verbal cues. And what? We do not judge. Now, this helps us to cultivate empathy, compassion, and kindness, which is needed for the other important part of effective communication, which is connecting with others in a way that allow both parties to contribute to another's well-being. So to do that, we create the right conditions. First and foremost, we learn to express our needs. And we also train ourselves to hear the needs of the other person. This is achieved with mindful listening. And then empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from their point of view, but not feeling what they feel. That is sympathy. Empathizing is the heart of listening. All right. Only then can we propose and move on to look for strategies or solutions that will satisfy both parties. So when we present strategies, we have to do it in a respectful and non-demanding manner, because that will be the ego speaking, isn't it? So whether the person says yes or no, we will give an equal amount of respect and understanding. If they say no, try to understand what needs keep them from saying yes. In the same way, when we listen and give empathy, it does not mean that we must do what the other person wants. In short, connecting positively means not benefiting at the other person's expense, but not giving up on your own needs either. So remember this, in this dialogue, the couple stated clearly and truthfully what they wanted without insulting each other. Okay, here I put out what should be spoken. Remember last week we talked about her needs and his needs. The wife expressed what bothered her without finding fault with the husband. The husband responded in a way that showed he respected the wife's feelings and that he did not expect her to clean up after him. At the same time, expressing his own needs that prevent him from helping her immediately. In a nutshell, harsh speech often results from ineffective communication. Now, here's number one, using harsh speech against another person. Here's number two, normally arises using harsh speech in retaliation. Which one is more difficult to exercise restraint over? Number one or number two? Definitely number two. Why? Because when someone speaks harshly to us, we perceive that as a lack of respect, understanding, or basic courtesy. And this sense of self, this ego, cannot take it. Now, how did the Buddha handle this? The Buddha and his monks had a lot of harsh speech directed at them. All right. The Brahmins often called the Buddhist monks shaven menial ascetics or scourings from the Brahma's foot. Brahma is actually their god, and the lowest caste were believed to be born out of the god's feet. Now, the priests, the Brahmins, they come from the god's mouth. That's the belief. So the Buddhist monks were believed to come from the scourings from the feet, which actually mean the monks are the scums of the gods. Now, a Brahmin even called nuns as shaven-headed whores. So the Brahma is their main god, but they also believe in a lot of gods. Yeah. So there was once a Brahmin approached the Buddha and abused him with very rude and harsh words. When he had finished speaking, the Buddha said this to him. You can read this on your own. So too, Brahmin, we who do not abuse anyone, who do not scold anyone, who do not rail against anyone, refuse to accept from you the abuse and the scolding and tirade you let loose at us. It still belongs to you, Brahmin. Now, the Buddha explained that one who abuses his own abuser, who scolds the one who scolds him, is said to partake of a meal, to enter upon an exchange. So when a person speaks harshly to you, he creates unwholesome karma. When you react in a similar fashion, you partake of the same unwholesome karma. So not only does retaliation will never help you settle conflicts, it does not attract good karma. Our intention to retaliate is not to communicate, right? Not about mindful communication or effectively communicate, but rather, right, to punish the other person, to satisfy our ego, and to give us relief from the pain that the other person is causing us. So by not indulging in retaliation, we are not being taken advantage of. We are just protecting our mind. Now, ill will, it forms the basis of most of its union involving harsh speech. In his discourse to a cowherd, the Buddha said this, right? In confronting ill will in our mind, we must recognize it, we must abandon it, remove it. If we do not, the ill will can easily and readily become unskillful speech or action. How do we do all that? Okay. Do you remember these 5 points? We have seen how these 5 points help us exercise restraint from falsehood and divisive speech. They also apply to harsh speech. And we will see the techniques for skillful speech when we move on to the doing good part in the last series. Okay. Constant reflection on past, present, and future actions. Now, does meditation help to reduce harsh speech? Of course, when you meditate, you become very mindful. Your mindfulness in the forefront of daily living. There is a gap, therefore, between the stimulus and the response. Your mind easily sits in metta, in kindness, which means in a neutral position, non-judgmental. So easier for us to pause before we talk. It allows us to recognize the telltale signs that show that we are ready for conflict. So instead of responding because we are so caught up with thoughts about the person, that is indulging in the narratives of the mind. Remember, mind consists of thoughts. right? Not the other way around. And thoughts do not equate the mind. Just like finger is part of the body, the finger is not the whole body. So when you become very mindful, you meditate, it's easier to have mind control thoughts and not the other way around. So if you're mindful, you have to turn inwards and look at yourself. We watch out for the physical reactions like these: tightness in your jaw, tension in your limbs or body, shallow or rapid breathing, flushes of heat, sweating or cold. So what are you doing here? So when you're starting to get angry, you turn your mind inwards and you're not getting personal. You are just seeing anger as anger, looking at the physical aspect. Then look at the mental, because non-verbal causes like facial expressions and body language will show in our aversion, right? And our readiness for conflict. Also watch for mental reactions like feelings of unease and discomfort, a feeling of heaviness, an urge to protect, explain, or defend yourself. Start with physical, then you go on to mental. This means recognizing what? Recognizing ill will, anger, and hatred. This is to see anger as anger clinically, not get caught up in the narrative of the mind. Then we abandon it, we let go. So how do we do it? Okay, I'm going to just go slow here. Now, let's say you're starting to get angry. You see, everything rises, falls when you see it as it is in reality, and that's vipassana practice. We take anger as an example. Anger is an aspect of dosa. Remember the three roots of evil? Greed, hatred, and delusion. So we look at delusion. Yeah. And dosa arises when something we want is not satisfied. So if we have anger, you are pushing yourself, all right? You are punishing yourself for someone else's perceived mistakes. So you should not get angry. You need to protect the mind. So you have two choices. What do? Do you participate in anger, or do you simply observe anger? Yeah? Of course, you just observe anger as anger. Don't go into the narrative. Okay, the moment you go into narrative, it's the ego. Then next, what do? Do you say this is anger or I am angry? This is anger, right? Not personal. All right. So when you say this is anger, you will recognize the anger comes from where? The anger comes from your own reaction. It's the way you react that causes you to be suffering. If you look at I am angry, both are wrong view. All right, whether it's within or without. When you look within, you are saying that that person caused you to be angry. So you're still blaming external circumstances. All right. Even when the cause of anger is from within, you feel that it's caused from someone else. Then what do? Do you let anger be, suppress anger, or replace anger with positive mental states? Now, suppress anger is a wrong view. Why? Because it's quite common, right? We call tahan, tahan. This refers to us bearing the hate, the anger, by turning our attention to other situations that are more pleasing through the senses. Like, for example, you go retail therapy, you go shopping, go drinking, avoiding the person. So you're not exactly practicing the Dharma. Dharma is about seeing reality. So you do not examine your mind and you do not resolve it anyway. You're just suppressing it. And the right view is you let anger be, knowing that what arises will fall. If you have been meditating for some time, it's very easy to watch your mind and you can see how the energy turns, the mind turns. Not easy, you get to see the mind when you're in samadhi. That is vipassana practice. But if you cannot see the mind yet, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You replace anger with positive mental states. That means you cultivate thoughts of kindness and compassion. Right? Neutral mind that does not judge. When you see the mind, you see the rise and the fall of the mental states. You see the three universal characteristics, right, of anicca, dukkha, and anatta. Correct? You see the impermanence, You see unsatisfactoriness and you see non-self. When it's not personal, you can see it's just energy. You see that this is a conditioned state, right? And as such, how can it be self, a permanent entity? It arises out of causes and conditions from that ego. And what do you see then? The first noble truth. You see dukkha, right? Suffering here. Then you will see that suffering comes from craving, and anger is the second noble truth because you crave for what things should be or should not be. You will also see the third noble truth. Cessation of suffering comes from what? When the causes and conditions that support the craving no longer exist. So let anger be is the best representation of the cessation of suffering. So anger is allowed to fade on its own without any participation from the observer. You just observe, not to participate in the storyline and the content and the narratives. But if you are replacing anger with positive mental states, what are you doing? You are practicing the fourth noble truth, right? The noble eightfold path. Now you understand what the Buddha is saying? This is what the Buddha means when he said to abandon, to remove, do away with, and to annihilate ill will. You do not have to tolerate anything. Just let go. Need, uh, need to have mental cultivation to do this. How you mental cultivate through meditation. Now, it is always the present action that we have the least control over because we are habitually unmindful of our actions. Wise reflection reminds us to listen mindfully, not to judge, and to sense the needs of others. It allows us to restrain ourselves from harming others with harsh speech. So whether we speak or not boils down to two factors, right? Remember the two factors when I talk about the other speeches, and I showed you this slide. No matter what you do, please do not harm yourself and please do not harm others. Next, give ourselves moral reminders as often as we can. Now, becoming a virtuous person is not like riding a bicycle. Huh? You do not learn how to do it once and then expect to ride that moral conviction with no difficulty for the rest of your life. Instead, skillful behavior is something you have to decide to do over and over and over again. And the more moral reminders you have in your life that reinforce your commitment, and the more regularly you bring up these reminders, the easier to stay on track. Now, this one all of you know, right? This is the one that we have to remember by heart. Sorry. Okay, this one. The other is the recollection of the 5 precepts, right? We can also create our own moral reminders, what some people call personal manifestos, which means like a declaration of values that are very important to us. For example, you do puja in the morning, you start with a small chant, or we can wear a jewelry like the Bodhi tree pendant, or you have lotus at home, or you wear white in retreats. Why? Because it represents simplicity, humility, and purity, right? So in his book, The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, Professor Dan Ariely demonstrates the importance of moral reminders by retelling a story found in the Talmud about a religious man who went to visit a prostitute. Now, Talmud means a collection of ancient writings of Jewish religious laws. Right? You can read this on your own. Moral reminders won't force us to do the right thing. What they will do is they prompt us to reflect on our values and gives us the strength to resist temptations. Why do you think people attend church, go for prayers at the mosque, or gather at Singapore Buddhist Mission on a weekly basis? It is not just to meet spiritual friends. We learn the Dharma and we have the push to practice the Dharma and to build good karma for ourselves. The next thing we need to note is that we have to hang around with the right people. Why? We live in an era where harsh language and profanity are actually very common. We see this in real life and we read this in books, magazines, and on social media. And also in movies, right? In music. In some movies, you see couples quarrel passionately and then make up passionately. And a lot of people think that such passion is very good. It is not. So the more we get exposed to this kind of influence, the more we think that it is okay to exercise harsh speech. But as Buddhist practitioners, we know that it is wrong to use harsh speech. It is not okay. So we have to keep close to our spiritual friends and the wise ones who will influence us on the right way. Next, very important, please do not rationalize any form of harsh speech. If your speech is rough, hard, hurtful, offensive, and provokes anger, then it is harsh speech no matter how you look at it. Rationalization is, in truth, just self-deception by reasoning. Again, the ego. In fact, the Buddha told his monks that before they express any disapproval or criticize another person, they should first make sure that first, bodily behavior is pure and irreproachable. Number two, verbal behavior are pure and irreproachable. Number three, they have a mind of loving kindness. And number four, and they are learned and they practice what they preach. Number five, they must practice right speech. Okay, the five conditions are for monks, but as lay person, all right, we should have at least three. Mind of loving kindness, which means a mind that does not judge. We need to practice what we preach, and we must practice right speech. Now, we learned earlier, right, that we have, when we have effective communication, we listen mindfully, we remain objective when we do not judge, which means it is good. It is good karma because you connect easily with people. People don't retaliate. People do not hate you. Things are better because you create more peace in your household, in your work environment. You're able to change people's mind through goodness. So to do more good to dilute the effects of unskillful speech, we need to be skillful and we need to cultivate this mind. All right, so we have to meditate. We develop what you call mind muscles when we meditate very regularly. With stronger mind muscles, mind does not get so easily disturbed and is less impulsive. We are better at keeping our mind at the present moment. We have better awareness. So we extend the gap between the stimulus and the response. Only then can we have mindful presence that allow us to observe the actual process of communication, which is our speech, our listening, even our inner world of thoughts, perception, and emotion. It's not personal. It's clinical and free from emotional baggage. Mindfulness also helps us remember the tools we have learned. We can hear or read everything the Buddha taught us about right speech. But if we cannot remember to use them, that it will not do us any good, is it not? And meditation will increase compassion in us as our minds become less and less centered on the ego, easier to let go, which is very useful in conflict situation. When we listen to talks like this organized by Singapore Buddhist Mission, right, we are practicing these three meritorious deeds, right? The rest are also important, and we know their importance on our journey towards the higher happiness of peace and tranquility. Now, apart from restraint, we also have to learn to tolerate blame and criticism from others and to sympathize with their shortcomings, to respect differences in viewpoints, to handle verbal abuse without feeling compelled to retaliation. Now, this is the definition given by the Buddha on harsh speech. You all remember? Rough, hard, hurtful to others, offensive to others, provoking anger, unconducive to concentration. So we shall see how we conduct harsh speech in the section. This is the doing good part. Remember that our Dharma training is a very gradual one. You cannot expect to improve overnight. We have to work towards harsh speech bit by bit. Okay. All right.